The process of production of capital. Part 4. The production of relative surplus value. As we saw in the last part, Marx distinguishes between absolute surplus value and relative surplus value. Absolute surplus value, which we looked at in the previous part, is produced by means of increasing how much work a worker does within an accounting period, so having a longer workday, for example. On the other hand, relative surplus value, which we're looking at in this part, is produced by decreasing the amount of socially necessary labour time. For example, decreasing the value of wage goods, wage repression, and increasing the productivity of labour. Let's say we've got a line ABC, which represents our working day. Let's say that the line AB is the necessary labour and BC is the surplus labour. Absolute surplus value would be if we were to lengthen the line BC so that the whole line from A to C would be longer overall. Relative surplus value is produced not by lengthening the working day, but by changing the proportion of necessary labour to surplus labour, which would consist in moving point B towards point A. So if we increase the productivity of labour, for example by developing more efficient machinery, then the labour time socially necessary for the production of a given article decreases. There, the capitalist is moving point B towards point A, and the proportion of surplus labour is increasing. Marx writes, in order to make the value of labour power go down, the rise in productivity of labour must seize upon those branches of industry whose products determine the value of labour power and consequently either belong to the category of normal means of subsistence or are capable of replacing them. Remember that the value of labour power is determined by the labour time necessary to produce the means of subsistence for the worker. So by increasing the productivity of labour in those branches of industry, the commodities needed to reproduce the worker will be cheapened, and so the value of labour power will fall. Marx also comments on the forms of organisation that are present within each capitalist firm. He has a chapter on cooperation and a chapter on the division of labour. He says, when numerous workers work together side by side in accordance with a plan, whether in the same process or in different but connected processes, this form of labour is called cooperation. There are a number of points to make here. It could be that you have one big task, which cannot itself be performed by one person, or you have a big task, which is an assemblage of small tasks, which could be performed simultaneously. In any case, the fact is that by having the workers function as a collective power, that creates a productive power which is greater than that of each of them individually. This collective productive power reduces the time necessary for the completion of the whole work. The second point is, later in Volume 3, Marx introduces the competition between capitals. If the capitals are operating on a competitive basis, that means that there is a limit to cooperation, because workers can only cooperate within a firm. They cannot cooperate across firms. My argument is, competitive markets actually limit the potential collective power of the whole society, because the workers can't cooperate across firms that are competing with each other. One reason we could support a system of workers' self-management, where the workers form federations which link up together, is that there is so much more we could achieve if we had a general economic plan, which all of the workers have direct input into. A system of democratic planning, that's the economics of libertarian socialism. It's about workers having democratic control over production of the society, and we can organise that with federations. Libertarian socialism would therefore contribute to the development of productive forces, because it allows for society-wide democratic cooperation which doesn't take place under capitalism. But let's think about the implications of cooperation under capitalism. These society-wide federations that you would find in a libertarian socialist society aren't in place, and so cooperation is something which is left to unaccountable private tyrannies, which Marx literally describes as being despotic. He says that the capitalist hands over the work of direct and constant supervision of the individual workers and groups of workers to a special kind of wage labourer. An industrial army of workers under the command of a capitalist requires, like a real army, officers, managers, and NCOs, foremen, overseers, who command during the labour process in the name of capital. Later, Marx writes, the socially productive power of labour develops as a free gift to capital whenever the workers are placed under certain conditions, and it is capital which places them under these conditions. Because this power costs capital nothing, while on the other hand it is not developed by the worker until his labour itself belongs to capital, it appears as a power which capital possesses by its nature, a productive power inherent in capital. The world beyond capitalism that I was describing earlier, in which the workers direct production on a federated basis, seems almost completely unthinkable, because the forms of consciousness that capitalism perpetuates are, among other things, the idea that workers lack the capacity to cooperate on our own initiative. So there's a relation of dependence, which is not the kind of economic relation you would want to have if you want to have a free society. In the chapter on the division of labour, one point Marx makes is, it is firstly clear that a worker who performs the same simple operation for the whole of his life converts his body into the automatic, one-sided implement of that operation. The collective worker, who constitutes the living mechanism of manufacture, is made up solely of such one-sidedly specialised workers. Marx also makes a point of quoting Adam Smith, who said that the man whose whole life is spent in performing a few simple operations has no occasion to exert his understanding. He generally becomes as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become. Adam Smith's proposed remedy for this, which Marx funnily describes as homeopathic, is education by the state. The development of Fordism and Taylor's system of so-called scientific management, which by the way was implemented in the USSR, in which workers are made to perform boring repetitive tasks over and over, would be some historical examples of the forms which the labour process takes under capitalism. Eliminating the hierarchical capitalist division of labour, which converts the worker's body into the one-sided implement of a simple operation, would provide people with opportunities to develop themselves in all sorts of ways. If production were to be organised on the basis of human need rather than profit, automation and the development of productive forces would be accompanied with a corresponding reduction in the amount of work we have to do, provided we can still meet people's needs. This is not how things are under capitalism. There is no built-in tendency within the capitalist system to correspondingly shorten the working day when more efficient machinery is developed. In fact, this only ever happens when workers' movements demand a shortening of the working day. At the beginning of his chapter on machinery in large-scale industry, Marx quotes John Stuart Mill, who says, "It is questionable if all the mechanical inventions yet made have lightened the day's toil of any human being." And Marx points out that this is not at all the purpose of the development of machinery under capitalism. Marx writes of the most immediate effects of machine production on the worker. Insofar as machinery dispenses with muscular power, it becomes a means for employing workers of slight muscular strength, or whose bodily development is incomplete, but whose limbs are all the more supple. The labour of women and children was therefore the first result of the capitalist application of machinery. And he goes into detail about that historically. Marx says, "Notices of demand for children's labour often resemble in form the inquiries for Negro slaves that were formerly to be read among the advertisements in American journals." And he gives an example where someone asks for children who can pass for 13 years. In other words, if they look 13, they're old enough to work. Later, Marx says that the moral degradation which arises out of the exploitation by capitalism of the labour of women and children has been so exhaustively presented by Friedrich Engels in his Condition of the Working Class in England, and by other writers too, that a mere mention will suffice here. Marx makes the astute observation that as soon as an effort is made to reduce exploitation on one front, the capitalist seeks compensation on all other fronts. So, for example, when the working day is shortened, which is something you have to force the state to implement through direct action, the response to that, on the part of the capitalist class, is to compensate for the shortening of the working day by developing more efficient machinery so that the proportion of necessary labour falls relative to the surplus labour. And we've seen that the introduction of machinery is used as a reason to exploit greater numbers of workers. The combination of his historical study of the working day and his analysis of machinery in large-scale industry provide a lot of empirical support for his argument that the capitalist system relies on exploitation, given that when efforts are made to reduce it, the capitalists respond by finding new ways to screw the workers. And this is still how capitalists behave. And I think we'll leave it there for now. Tune in soon for a video amalgamating parts 5 and 6, which will look at the production of absolute and relative surplus value together, and also wages. Of course, do your bit for our global community, stay home and stay well. Full solidarity to anyone who's unable to self-isolate due to living in abusive relationships, or if self-isolation means going home to an abusive family. I suggest that people donate to the Swarm Collective, sex worker advocacy and resistance movement, as they're trying to gather a hardship fund for sex workers who are among some of the most economically vulnerable at this time where physical distancing is necessary. You can make a donation at swarmcollective.org/donate. All donations made to Swarm from now to the 30th of April will go directly into this fund and will provide mutual aid to sex workers in the UK who are in severe financial hardship. Stay safe and thanks for watching.